Before you can add sockets to your web application, you need a web application to add them to. And that is exactly what we're going to do in this video. We're going to make a basic Express app. We're going to get it up on GitHub, and we're going to deploy it to Heroku so we can view it live in the browser. Now, the first step to that process is going to be to make a directory. We're going to do a few things together to get us all going in the right direction, and there'll be a few challenges scattered throughout this one when we're covering something we've already done before. The first step in the process from the desktop is going to be to run mkdir to make a new directory for this project. I'm going to call mine node-chat-app. Then we can use cd to navigate into that directory, and we can run a few commands. First up, npm init. As with all of our projects in this course, we are going to be taking advantage of npm. So we're going to run this command and use enter to use the default value for every option. When we're done, we can type yes, and now we have a package.json file. Before we move into Atom, we're also going to run git init to initialize a new Git repository. We're going to be putting this project under version control using Git, and we're also going to be using Git to push to GitHub and to Heroku. With this in place, I can use clear to clear the terminal output, and we can move into Atom, and we can start by opening up the folder and setting up our basic app structure. I'm going to open up the folder which we just created on the desktop called node-chat-app, and in here we're going to get started by making a couple directories. Now, unlike the other apps in this course, the chat app is going to have a front end, which means we're going to be writing some HTML, we're going to be adding some styles, and we're going to be writing some JavaScript code that runs in the browser as opposed to running on the server. For this to work, we're going to have two folders. One is going to be called server, which is going to store all of our Node.js code. And the other one is going to be called public. This is going to store our styles, our HTML files, and our client-side JavaScript. Now, inside of server, just like we did for the to-do API, we're going to have a server.js file, and this is going to be the root of our Node application. This file is going to do stuff like create a new Express app, configure the public directory to be the static folder Express serves up, and finally, it'll call app.listen to start up the server. Inside of public, what we're going to do for this video is create just one file, index.html. Index.html is going to be the markup page we serve when someone visits the app. And for now, we're going to make a really simple one that just prints a message to the screen so we can confirm it's properly getting served up. In the next video, we'll worry about integrating Socket.io on the client. For now, though, we're going to provide a doc type so the browser knows which version of HTML we want to use. We're telling it to use HTML, which refers to HTML5. Next up, we're going to open and close our HTML tag. This is going to let us provide the head and body tag, which is exactly what we're going to need to do to get things working. First up is head. Inside of head, we can provide various configuration tags. We're going to use just one for now, meta, so we can tell the browser which char set we want to use. On the meta tag, we're going to provide the char set attribute, setting it equal to, inside of quotes, UTF-8. Next up, we're going to provide the body tag inside of HTML. This contains the HTML we want to actually render to the screen. And what we're going to do for this one is render a p tag, paragraph, and we're going to have some simple text like welcome to the chat app. This is all that's going to show up for the moment. I'm going to go ahead and close the paragraph tag, and now we can move outside of the HTML file, going back into the server file. We want to set up this server to serve up the public directory. Now, unlike the original Express application we created, the server.js file is not in the root of the project, which means we have to go up a directory from server to node-chat-app, then we have to go into public. This is going to make it a little hard to set up the Express middleware. What we're going to do is take a look at a built-in Node module that makes it really easy to convert paths. Now, in order to show you what I'm talking about, let's go ahead and use two console.log calls. The first console log call is going to show us how we used to do it, and the second one is going to show us the better way to do it. Inside of the first one, what we're going to do is provide the same path we provided for our very first Express app. We used __dir name to reference the current directory, which in this case is the server directory because the file is inside of the server folder. Then we concatenated /public. Now in this case, we do not have a public folder in the server folder. The public folder and the server folder are at the exact same level, which means we need to use ... to go up a directory, then we need to go into public. This is the old way to do things. And if we run this from the terminal, we can see why it looks a little weird. I'm going to use nodemon to run server/server.js, and what we get is this path. We go into users Andrew desktop, the project folder, which is expected. Then we go into server, out of server, and into public. This is absolutely unnecessary. What we'd like to do is just go from the project folder right into public, keeping a clean cross-OS compatible path. In order to do that, we're going to use a module that comes with Node called path. As always, I want to show you where the documentation lives because path has plenty of methods that we won't be using here. Node.js.org is where we can find the docs. We're going to go to that docs page, and then we're going to go to the API reference page. This is a list of all the modules we have available to us. We're using the path module, and inside of path, the method we're going to be using is join, which you can see right here. If you click it, you can go to a little example of how join works. Join takes your partial paths and it joins them together, which means the example below results in the following path. We start with foo, which you see right here. We then go into bar, which also shows up. We go into baz/ASDF, which does indeed show up. The next part is the interesting part. We go into this QUUX directory, then we go out using ... And you can see the result path doesn't show us going into and out of like our path does over inside of the terminal. Instead, it resolves that into the final path where the QUUX directory is nowhere in sight. We're going to use this exact same method to clean up our path. Over inside of Atom, we can load in the path module by creating a constant called path and requiring it. Remember, this one does not need to be installed. It is a built-in module. You have access to it without using npm. Next up, we're going to make a variable called public path. I'm going to make that a constant variable since we're not going to be making any changes to it. And we're going to call path.join. We'll pass some arguments into path.join in a moment. Before we do though, I'm going to console.log public path. Now inside of path.join, what we want to do is take these two paths, but pass them in as separate arguments. We do still want to start in the dir name directory, the server folder. Then, as the second argument, we're going to specify the relative path inside of quotes. We're going to go out of directory using ... Then we're going to use / to go into the public folder. I'm going to save the server file, and we should now be able to go back to the terminal and see our new path. And here it is. Instead of going into server and then going out like we do above, we go right into the public directory, which is ideal. This is the path we want to provide to the Express static middleware. Now that we have this public path variable in place, it's time for your first of two challenges. This challenge is going to be for you to set up Express locally. Before we get into the challenge details, we are going to install it together using npm i. The module name is Express, and we're going to use the most recent version at 4.14.0 with the save flag. I'm going to run the installer, then we can go ahead and actually use it inside of server.js. In package.json, we now have it sitting right here. With this in place, here is your challenge. You're going to create a brand new Express application, and you're also going to configure the Express static middleware like we've done previously to serve up the public folder. Finally, you're going to call app.listen on port 3000. You're going to provide one of those little callback functions to print a message to the terminal like server is up on port 3000. Once you have the server created, you're going to start it up inside of the terminal and head to localhost 3000 inside of the browser. If I go there right now, we're going to get an error because there is no server running on that port. You should be able to refresh this page and see the little message we typed in the paragraph tag over inside of index.html. So take a moment to knock that out. You can use anything we've done previously in the course. We have done all of this before. You can also use Google or any other resources if you get stuck. Take a moment to fill out server, test it, and when you're done, click play. All right, hopefully you were able to get that done without too much trouble. The first thing I'm going to do is load in Express by creating a constant called Express and requiring the library we just installed. Next up, you needed to make an app variable where we can configure our Express application. I'm going to make a variable called app and set it equal to a call to Express. Remember, we don't configure Express by passing in arguments. Instead, we configure Express by calling methods on app to create routes, add middleware, or start up the server. First up, we're going to be calling app.use to configure our Express static middleware. This is going to serve up that public folder. What you needed to do was call express.static. Passing in the path, we created a public path variable which stores exactly the path we need. The last thing to do is call app.listen. This is going to start up the server on port 3000, and we're going to provide a callback function as the second argument to print a little message to the terminal once the server is up. I'm going to use console.log to print server is up on port 3000. With this in place, we can now start up the server over inside of the terminal and make sure our index.html file shows up in the browser. I'm going to go ahead and use clear to clear the terminal output. Then I'll use node-mon to run the server. Server/server.js. Here we get our little message, server is up on port 3000. And over in the browser, if I give things a refresh, we get our markup. Welcome to the chat app. This is fantastic. We now have a basic server set up, which means in the next video, we can actually add socket.io on both the client and the back end. Now, before we go, we are going to do just one more challenge, getting things on GitHub and Heroku. What we're going to do first inside of Atom is set up a few things. We do need to set up a gitignore file right here. We're going to provide that in the root of the project. Inside of gitignore, once again, the only thing we'll be ignoring is the node modules directory. We do not want to commit any of this code to our repo because it can be generated using npm install and it's subject to change. It's a real pain to manage that sort of thing. It is not recommended you commit it. The next thing we're going to do is configure a few things for Heroku. First up, if you remember, we have to use that process.env.port environment variable. I'm going to create a constant port right here, setting it equal to process.env.uppercase port or 3000, which we'll use locally. Now we can provide port here, and we can provide it in the message down below by changing our regular string over to a template string. Server is up on, and I'll inject the port variable value. Now that we have that in place, the next thing we need to change in order to get our app set up for Heroku, that part will be your challenge, is to update the package.json file, adding a start script and specifying the version of Node we want to use. Under scripts, I'm going to add a start script telling Heroku how to start the application. In order to start the app, you have to run the node command. You're going to go into the server directory, and the file to start it up is server.js. We're also going to specify engines, which we've done before. Engines, as you know, lets you tell Heroku which version of Node to use. This is going to be important as we are taking advantage of some features only available in the latest versions of Node. Right here, I'm going to provide the exact same key value pair I used previously, setting Node equal to 6.2.2. If you're using a different version of Node, you can provide that here instead of the version I have. Now that we have this in place, you are ready for your challenge. Your challenge is going to be to make a commit with all of the current uncommitted files. You're going to then go into GitHub and create a GitHub repository, and you're going to push your local code up. Make sure the code actually gets on GitHub. You can do that by refreshing the GitHub repo page, and you should see your directory structure right there on the repo. The next thing you need to do is create a Heroku application and deploy to it. Once your application is deployed, you should be able to visit the app URL in the browser, and you should see the exact same message as the one we have here. Welcome to the chat app should print, but instead of being on localhost 3000, you should be on the actual Heroku app. Now, we already made all the changes necessary inside of the project. We configured the port variable and we set up our scripts and engines. So you don't have to make any more code changes. You just need to work your wizardry in the browser and in the terminal to get this done. Take a moment to knock that out, add the GitHub repo, deploy to Heroku, test it, and when you're done, click play. All right, hopefully you didn't have too much trouble getting that done. The first step, well, the one I'm going to take first anyways, is to make a new GitHub repository. We need a place to push up our code. I'm going to head over to github.com, click that big green new repository button, and we can make a new one. I'm going to call my repository Node Course 2 Chat App. I am going to leave this public, and I am going to actually create it. Now that we're here, we have a list of commands we can use. We have an existing repository we want to push, so we can copy these lines. Over in the terminal, before we can actually push anything though, we do need to make a commit. I'm going to shut down nodemon and run git status. Right here, you see we have our expected files. We have the public and server folder. We have gitignore and package.json. Node_modules is nowhere in sight. Then you needed to use git add to add these untracked files to the next commit. If you run git status again, you can see everything does look good. We have 4 changes to be committed, 4 new files. I'm going to run git commit with the M flag to specify a message. The A flag is not required since all of the files are already added. Right here, init commit is going to get the job done. Once you have that commit in place, you can actually push it up to GitHub by running the 2 lines they gave you. I'm going to run both of those, and it's now up on GitHub. We can confirm that by refreshing the page, and instead of seeing the instructions, we see the files we created. The next and last thing to do was get the app on Heroku. You don't actually have to go to the Heroku web app to get that done. We can run Heroku, create right here. We can go ahead and create the application. Then we can use git push Heroku master to deploy the app. I'm going to go ahead and run that. This is going to take my local code, push it up to Heroku. Heroku is going to see that new code was pushed. It's then going to go ahead and deploy it. Once it's up, we can use the Heroku open command to open up the app URL in the browser, or you can always grab the URL right here. I'm going to copy the URL from up above, head into the browser, paste it, and right here we should see our app, and we do. Welcome to the chat application shows up to the screen, and with this in place, we are done. We have a basic Express server, we have a back end and a front end. It's up on GitHub and it's up on Heroku. We are ready to move on to the next video where we are actually going to start integrating Socket.io. I'm super excited to get to it, so stay tuned. I will see you next time.